Welcome to the Up Arrow Podcast with William Harris, featuring top business leaders sharing strategies and resources to get to the next level. Now, let's get started with the show.
Hey everyone, I'm William Harris. I'm the founder and CEO of Element and the host of the Up Arrow Podcast, where I feature the best minds in e-commerce to help you scale from 10 million to 100 million and beyond as you up arrow your business and your personal life. Joining me today is Jacques Spitzer. To some, Jacques is a riddle wrapped in a mystery inside of some of the greatest performing commercials of all time. To those he works with, Jacques is a passionate leader, connector, and storyteller with an innate ability to build brands and create marketing that people love. His 4 times Emmy Award-winning 8-figure agency, Raindrop, has generated over 1 billion views and $1 billion in campaign sales for brands like Dr. Squatch, Manscaped, Loom, Native, Pori, Ridge, and more. Raindrop was also behind the top-performing YouTube ad of 2020 and the Dr. Squatch Super Bowl commercial. Today we're going to be talking about ad content that will get you to 2 billion, and hint, it's not UGC. Jacques, excited to have you on the show today.
I'm so excited to be here and ready to rock. What an intro. And I better be an enigma, I guess. I better be a mystery wrapped inside of something else.
Yeah, you need almost like the dark shadow coming over you, like half lighting. I don't know, split lighting, right? What is it? You know better than I do what the different lighting styles are.
Oh, man.
I want to give a shout out to Jacob Burkhouse, your growth director. He and I were chatting about things, and I was like, dude, you got to get Jacques on the podcast. So he made the intro. So Jacob, thank you very much for making this intro.
Jacob is the man. I appreciate. Jacob is one of those people who is genuinely curious about everything. And I love, he's always sending me stuff on whether it's LinkedIn, on Instagram. He's just always got his finger on the pulse of what's happening out there. So I appreciate that he connected us.
Yeah, curiosity is just paramount to just anything. I love it. Before we dig into the good stuff, I do want to announce our sponsor. This episode is brought to you by Element. Element is an award-winning advertising agency optimizing e-commerce campaigns around profit. In fact, we've helped 13 of our customers get acquired, with the largest one that sold for nearly 800 million and one that IPO'd. You can learn more on our website at element.com, which is spelled ELUMYNT.com. That said, on to the good stuff.
Pew, pew, pew,
okay.
pew, 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 pew. Go to the Element website. Pew, pew, pew.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, so you and I were chatting, and you told me that every brand that has gone from 40 million to 100 million plus has had to find a second major channel. Why is this always true?
Man, you're hitting me with the good stuff right off the bat.
That's
well, let's think about it this way. So one of the things that we see with a lot of brands early on is that they find, like, every brand kind of has to find a channel that works for them. And I'll give you some examples of what we tend to see. Some brands come to us, and they've gotten from 0 to 20 million, 30 million, 40 million, whether it's, on TikTok shops, or many of them are meta focused. Some of them are a little bit more bottom funnel, sort of Google shopping focused, right? What you'll tend to see is that most of what we see is that people either have a really, really strong meta presence. That's 80% of the time what we see. But we do see brands that really dominate on TikTok. We have people that come to us that they have only ever been able to scale and work with. They got to $20 million in sales only on YouTube, and they can't figure out how to get meta to work for them and their audience. Or people that come to us in television has been their only channel, right? So I would say, to be a brand that gets to that revenue size, you tend to have at least one channel that is a dominant channel that you can grow and scale. And the reason that you threw out, I think 40 million is a pretty good number, because I think that's kind of what we tend to see be this place where you have this almost diminishing marginal return, especially on Meta, where it's like, if you continue to spend and spend and spend, you tend to see bigger swings in, like, just month to month, day to day activity, whatever the algorithm decides to do that day, that week, that month. And, the brands that we have worked with who have gotten to, 200 million in sales, 500 million sales, $1 billion in sales, they tend to be able to create a secondary channel that can compete at times even with their primary channel. And I oftentimes think of it as like an airplane, where imagine that an airplane only needs one propeller to fly. It's like, well, that works, but if you were to have two propellers, right? And it's a little, the analogy is not perfect because a two prop airplane does need two propellers to work. But the idea is like, if you have two propellers, you can, not only can you go faster, but like if one of them is experiencing trouble, then the other one keeps going, right? And so usually the 1-2 combo we're seeing is a brand has meta and they've seen success and scaled it, but they're just sort of like hitting this sort of, I won't call it a wall, but it is like a moment where I should say they could be hitting a wall. Some brands reach out to us as they're reaching this like, well, we're actually going a little bit backwards. We have our favorite and then the best moment to reach out is when you're like, look, I want to get ahead of this. Like nothing is broken with what I'm trying to do, but I'm like, if I want to get to double, triple where I'm headed, I can't just rely on one dominant channel with very little spending on other channels. So what we end up seeing is that a brand will figure out how to leverage a secondary channel to lift all the boats, really. And so imagine you're a brand, you're on Amazon, maybe you're on Shopify, maybe you're in some retail, and you have Meta as your primary driver. It's like, well, we tend to see something like a YouTube really pair well there because for a variety of factors, a lot of times it's lower CPMs. We're able to reach people in a targeted way. I can speak to way more about like why 99% of people fail on YouTube in a little bit. But like YouTube, we see be a main driver, and we see connected television and linear TV still be great channels to counterbalance the growth and the top of funnel really that Meta provides. And it does lift all channels. Like you will see more spillover if you're on Amazon on your Amazon. Like you will see just, again, additional spillover. I mean, even we have brands that only do Meta and there's still a ton of spillover to their Amazon anyway, right? Like that's not news to anybody, but that's only going to compound as you add additional channels. But man, it's just something that I've seen time and time again. Once you can crack a secondary channel that you can rely on to scale and spend against, it just gives you so much room to run.
Yeah. I like the second channel piece because I think one of the things that I appreciate, at least as the media buyer about it, is that it usually forces a brand to have to rethink a lot of their content strategy anyways. So if you're going from Meta and now you're going to YouTube or CTV or TikTok or anywhere else, right? Like you have to rethink what you're doing because the same content isn't necessarily going to work there. Elements of it will, right? And so it's like, you'll say, a lot of times I'll say, you could take something from TikTok and it will usually perform decently well on Meta and YouTube Shorts. You can't take something from Meta and bring it over into TikTok typically if you haven't already cracked the TikTok style content. Same thing is you can't take your Meta ads and bring them to YouTube typically. And so what I find is that it's usually a good opportunity for brands to really start to think what it is that they're doing from a content perspective. And that's the thing that I like, because then, like to your point, it helps all of the channels perform better. Now your Meta starts performing better because you actually have different content that's going to work differently, reaching different people. And so that's really where I wanted to take this today, is really more on the content side, because that's where you guys focus. When you think about what I'll call hero content, I don't know what you call it. Maybe you call it something different. I'd love to know if you have a name for it, but like content that is a level above beyond just like your typical influencer, UGC, or even the stuff that we call like performance creative, which is like, you know, what we're going to end up working on is just taking like your assets and putting it into some basic, you know, ads and things like that. But when you're taking it into like really good content, when you think about what that content is like, what does it look like? What does it smell like? What does it taste like? Like what makes that good content?
Well, let's go ahead and lick this content like it's an ice cream, a scoop of ice cream, so we can really get a flavor in our in our palate. Oh man,
a little umami on that. Yeah.
Yes. So, man, well asked question. I guess I have three sort of reactions to the question. I think I want to talk a little bit, so you can keep me honest. I want to talk a little bit about, because kind of the question is, well, if it's so obvious to add a second channel, why wouldn't you just go ahead and do it?
Sure.
Like, And it's like, well, there's kind of three reasons. The one is it takes different type of creative to win in those channels.
Mm-hmm.
It takes different types of media buying and very specific parameters to see success. And then actually tracking and understanding the success, the attribution component of it is more blurry and more confusing as well. So I'm going to talk about all three of those how the creative matters in that. So, so the reason that most brands, like I see Meta, I'm really going hard on Meta and I guess Google Shopping in this case, because what it takes to be successful there, to sell a product, the beauty of those platforms is that it's relatively low lift. Like you can just stick a static ad that you made in Canva or a UGC video into Meta, and it can do millions of dollars in sales for you. Right. And so it's very difficult for people to, like, you're growing this brand, you're driving forward. I should say, you're selling product. I don't know if you're necessarily growing the brand, but you're selling product. And so it's hard for people to then go, okay, what type of creative do I need to invest in? And what type of storytelling do I need to do? And what channel should I do it in? And so you use the term hero content. I'm going to more generally refer to it as like top of funnel content.
Got it. Yep.
And the reason I don't know that there's like an exact perfect word, but the reason I'm going to say that is most brands have never made an ad that anyone would forward to a friend.
Yes, exactly.
Right. A lot of brands haven't made an ad even coming from their own brand voice. It's come from someone else. It's all UGC. It's all statics. So they haven't even developed. I mean, you can be a $50 million company and have no brand voice, right?
Totally. Yes. Seen a lot.
So, and that's very real, very real. And it's part of the plateau and it's part of the frustration is then, okay, well, now we're going to go into a platform like television or YouTube where you have to have some sense of what are we communicating? What's our story? What's our brand voice? And one of the things that I'm really big on preaching, and because we've seen a lot of success on YouTube, we've had over 20 campaigns scale to more than 10 million views, paid views. We've had ads do 100 million views, 250 million views, right? Scalably, meaning they just kept selling, and so you keep spending behind them. And our big ethos is like, we need to make an ad better than the MrBeast video you're about to watch, right?
Right. Yes.
Which is crazy because we actually a year ago got a call from MrBeast's team who recognized our ads, and they're like, "Hey, can you work with us on some projects?" So we got the chance to work with them. But I was like, "How cool is it that MrBeast people recognize that we understand attention for that channel in the same way that they do?" Yeah. Does that make sense?
Were you working directly with him though, not just his people? Did you get to like sit in a room with him?
Yes. Let me back up and say,
okay.
Was I in the same room as MrBeast? Yes, right. But but the majority of our communication was with people that work there.
Sure.
In fact, they've now gone on. The people that we worked directly with just executive produced and edited his show, which was awesome. The Beast Game stuff. Cool. But I think to maybe provide clarity to that. We helped with a project where we were doing the post production for it. So we flew out there. We did all the editing for the project and motion design. And what I didn't realize is that Jimmy is I knew he was a beast. It's in his name, but he shot 3 things that day. We were just one of 3 things that he shot in one day. He started at 5 a.m. Ours didn't start until 8 p.m. So when he got there, it wasn't like, hey, let's hang out. It was like, like, let's roll. In fact, it was so funny because there was a point where he walked up to me and he was like, hey, you guys are here, right? For the project to help. And I was like, yeah. And I thought he was going to start talking to us. He's like, yeah, I need that chair. And I was like, okay. So that's as close as I came to getting to know Jimmy. But
that's still pretty cool.
but it was a really cool experience, and it was just being part of working with them. But the reason I'm bringing that up though is it's like the reality is that they understand in this channel there's certain types of attention, there's certain types of flow, there's certain types of realities. This is what the content needs to be to win here. And if you just try to stick something you made for television onto YouTube, it won't sell, it won't work. If you try to your point, take something you made for Meta and put it on YouTube, it won't sell, it won't work. So that is true of every channel. It's like every channel, and you said it earlier, TikTok, YouTube, television, it's like you have to create the creative for the context in which it will be viewed. And so let's just start there. It's like, why do most brands not decide to invest in it until they're almost forced to at times? It's because they're like, well, that's just a bigger swing. It's more expensive to produce the content because there's no cheap and easy way to make great content. Right. There's cheaper ways and you can get lucky, but like on a repeatable basis of like insight driven creative that drives action in real time and gets you to not skip, like that's a very specific type of asset. And so whether you're doing YouTube or television, it's like immediately the amount of thought and budget and creativity that has to go into it, it goes up. Then the secondary component of that is, you know, these platforms are set up for reach out of the box, not for conversion. So what I mean by that is like YouTube and television, like you have to be very mindful about limiting the placement to exactly who the audience needs to be, because it's set up for the biggest advertisers in the world to reach as many people as possible to sell products at retail, not to convert for a direct to consumer brand. And so we only have like a couple people that we will even recommend or work with on the, especially the YouTube or even connected TV side, because it's like, it's such a specific skill set to be successful there. And then the final component is the lack of direct feedback loop that you lack. It's like, it becomes much more triangulated to do stuff that isn't like, oh, I see an ad, I click exactly on it, I go to a landing page, I buy. It's like a lot of people, when they see a TV ad, they see a YouTube ad, they see a fill in the blank, instead of clicking on an ad, they'll just open a new browser tab. And so you'll see like branded search lift, you'll see, you know, post-purchase survey results. Like it takes more triangulation, and people don't like that. I think everyone likes that safety blanket of like, I'm spending X and I can see I'm making exactly Y. But the biggest brands in the world, like they eventually just move to like a mixed modeling or you know, some sort of other model, because that you can't be a $250 million brand and have one channel that you're like pulling the levers on day to day. So that's a very long-winded way of saying like, yes, every channel needs different creative, but it also needs different buying, and it needs different different expectations.
Yeah, we talk a lot about the different mismatches and attribution systems and the way that we're going about that on other episodes too. If you're watching and listening and you're like, oh, tell me more, go deeper into that. There's a good episode by Matt Barr over at Faring. There's another one with Jeremiah Prummer over at No Commerce. Both of those are getting into, you know, customer surveys being a really good thing. The other thing that we really like is just a geo holdout, you know, run it in certain areas, not in other areas, and look at the actual real lift. That'll give you a good indication of what that incrementality looks like. Okay, so we've maybe understood about a little bit more about what this content is. What's the process like for actually going and coming up with an ad that has the potential to be shared, like you said, where it's like where you actually want to share this with your friends? This is, you know, better than just the normal stuff that you see out there. What does the process look like? Because I think a lot of people maybe sometimes get sticker shock when they see, you know, they're used to $100 UGC ads that they're getting, and then all of a sudden they're going to get something produced, but they don't understand maybe everything that goes into making this.
Sure. So, process wise, I think there's two ways to think about and approach this. One is someone has to do the heavy lifting of the both what drives the insight, which I'll talk a little bit about, and then also, you know, what's going to drive purchase action, right? Like if that's your goals, like, hey, I want to get attention from the right people. I want them to buy. Like, someone has to do some of that heavy lifting. And I think one of the mistakes brands make is they say, we need a commercial. Let's reach out to a video production firm.
Yes.
And get in contact with them. Problem with that is that, I mean, and I have lots of friends that run video production firms that like I would use, again, once I figured out like literally all the things, and it's like, I just need someone to execute the vision of this and edit it. Great. But if you're going to get onto a new channel, you know, you need someone, again, who understands those channels, what wins there, have seen success and made mistakes there, right? Like, because that's going to save you time and energy. So I can speak to our process. You know, and for any client, we are approaching it not from a standpoint necessarily of how do we get someone to share this. We actually start with more so just what is the insight, and insight's a word that gets thrown around a lot. Sure. It might be something also that is foreign to direct to consumer brands in comparison. Like if you work with, like we do a lot of work with Procter and Gamble. Like if you work with the Procter and Gambles, the Unilevers, they'll literally be like, what was the inside of that work? Like that's just the way that they approach it. But you know, the reality is, and I'll break down how we think about it, is we are asking ourselves, what is somebody's why when it comes to this brand? You've probably heard the Simon Sinek quote. It's like, people don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it.
Yep.
And it's something that I think that mindset was a giant leap forward. I use the analogy that it was like, as human beings, one day we discovered that the world was not flat, it was round. It's like, that's a huge discovery, right? It's a big deal. But even at that point in time in human history, we still believed that, well, now we were like, oh, wow, it's round. But then we still believed that the sun and everything in the universe revolved around us, right? And I think a lot of brands are still stuck in that mindset, and they don't realize, like, no, the consumer is the center of their own universe and we revolve around them. And so what we do is we take the brand and we take them through this process of like, what are the insights that tumble out of the consumer's why? Everything that we buy says something about who we believe we are or who we're trying to become. And so we literally write those out. What are those? Whether you're making a decision about who to work for media buying, what brand of cereal you're going to buy, whether you buy a store brand or name brand, what shoes you buy, everything you do is a reflection of those things. And so we write those down because ultimately we want to see people see those things mirrored back to them, right? That's what's going to grab and pull them in, is if they're like, oh, that is who I'm trying to become, or, ooh, that is who I am. Now you have my attention individually. And then we do find that the use of, you know, whether it's education, humor, inspiration, these are all tools to keep someone engaged. You know, with these platforms, like the more time you can spend with anyone, the deeper you can develop that relationship. It's one of the reasons we've loved YouTube, is like, you can make a really long ad, and if it's entertaining and pulling people in, you can do a lot of education and a lot of fun. One of our
best ads on YouTube is like 9 minutes long. It's like, this is not even an ad anymore.
No, and so I just strategically, it's like, I think one of the things that I find very interesting is we do have like a couple people in it, like we have, I don't know who our competitor is anymore, like with what we do, but it's like people who create some, like, let's say direct response YouTube creatives, right? One of the mistakes I think I see other people make is they'll just write 5 scripts and be like, pick one. And I'm like, that's not how you're going to develop incredible, creative, iconic brand voices that you can repeat, not just in that, in other channels. And so we're really starting with, like, our concepting is, what's the insight? What are people's whys, basically, or what's their why? And the second one is, what is the context that we're going to place all this in that's compelling visually and compelling to watch, right? And so we pitch concepts, you know, it's like, hey, trying to think of one that we've already launched. Like we did a great spot for Groons. that came out, and they're like green gummies, and it features this kid who basically asks his mom, "Hey, can I have gummies in my lunch?" And she says no, and then he turns the house into a courtroom, and he's a lawyer, right? Nice. And so he wears this like oversized jacket, and it's like, so the concept was like Better Call Barry, like the whole thing was like the kid's going to be a lawyer, and he's going to put his mom on stand and his dad on the stand, and there's all this crazy stuff happening. It's like, but not a single line of the entire script has been written yet. It's like just the concept of like, what world are we living in? Why is this going to be interesting?
I like that.
Now let's go and write a script. And so that's highly unique, but it's such a critical step, because you're like, you kind of said, well, what's going to make it shareable? I'm like, honestly, we need to ask ourselves, what's going to make it watchable?
Yeah. That's
like,
good.
Like before we were about sharing. It's like, what's going to make it watchable? And so building that the context for like what's going to make it interesting is done before we write scripts.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. The idea of like, if before it's going to be shareable, it has to be watchable. If it's not watchable, then it's not shareable, because nobody's going to want to share it. Exactly. You were talking about even just this idea of like 5 scripts and coming up with 5 scripts, and then it's like pick one. And it reminded me of something from a book, The Psychology of Money by Morgan Housel. Really good book. And in it, and I don't remember the name of the guy, but there's an art collector that he talks about. And this art collector had this massive art fortune, and he sold it to like the German, museum or whatever. And they're like, well, how did he end up being so good at picking this? He had Picasso's and all these other things. It's like, how did he get so good at picking all of these amazing art pieces that are now worth millions, maybe billions? I don't even remember that. It's immaterial to what we're talking about, but they find out that it's like, that was 1% of his collection though. The reality is he bought so much art that the inevitability of something ending up being successful was a lot higher. And I think sometimes when people go into some of the creative, they take that same approach. They're like, great, we're going to take one swing at this. Let's make one $15,000 commercial. That didn't work. Well, I guess we're just going to stick with UGC. And to your point, It's like, it's not just here's 5 scripts, pick one. What is the insight? What's the context? Let's start from there. Let's start developing more than one context. Let's start getting out there and taking many swings. Would you agree with that approach, or?
So here's what I'll say. I think there are a couple different ways to approach anything. But I always say, like, you can't hit a home run without taking a big swing.
Sure. Yep.
So let's just flat out, like, all of the brands that have really, really, really broken through eventually took the risk. It took a risk. Like, no one just safely stumbles their way into an incredible brand.
Yeah.
Right. It takes investment. Good. It takes intentionality. And no $15,000 video is going to just randomly change the course of your brand if you're at $20 to $40 million, even $10 million, $5 million. It's like, that's just not the expectation or the hope. And so I think too, one of the things that we think about everything that we do as more like a campaign, because we recognize that, like, we do typically create multiple opening hooks. We create variations and cut downs. We put them in different formats. Because the reality is, like, you have to run and test and learn on anything you do. And so, that would just be, again, a fundamentally different approach of like, I'm going to go make a blank thing. It's like, no. Like, you want to create a couple variations that you can learn from and work with. Right. That is going to be a fundamentally different approach for a brand that's trying to learn a little bit more about what people respond to. And then once you have a sense of not only product market fit, but a message that resonates in a channel, that's where it gets really exciting. And you just double and triple down on developing out, whether it's a tone of voice, characters. The more consistent you can be, the more you can drive that brand tone. And that's what we've done, whether it was with James Schrader and the Dr. Squatch stuff, and Mike Langsdale, or Lauren, who's with Native as Bathroydite. It's like, you create these worlds and these characters that people come to know and respond to. And frankly, if you do it right, they're like, when the ads pop up, they're like, ooh, a new ad, instead of like, a new ad. If you can do it right, like, that's the difference over time. But I hope I answered your question. It's like, at some point, people just need to say, look, I'm going to be willing to take some swings and take some risks, but a shotgun approach, because I'm like, it's like it just never, I think the shotgun approach, what it does is I find it to be lazy, because it means that you're not doing the work to narrow the possibilities before you know what you're even testing.
Yes. And I think it's a lot of wasted spend. So, I know there's another, let's say, frame of thought out there where people are like, you need to be testing, 1,000 ads a day or some kind of ridiculous number. And to your point, but it's 1,000 ads that you should never have tested in the first place. And so it's not really testing if they were just bad to begin with.
Yeah. Yep.
You're literally just wasting spend. So let's say that you are a $10 million brand. I want to start at the lower end of the spectrum here. $10 million brand. And you've gotten to $10 million just off of statics and carousels and whatever else. And you're like, okay, we need to invest in this. And maybe that's a little bit wrong, but it's like we've run into brands that are even spending $1 million a month on ads. And the suggestion of like, hey, let's get some $50,000 stuff going here for ads. They're like, oh, that's so much money. It's like, you're spending $1 million. Like, this is not a lot compared to what you're spending. But like, what is the amount that you say, like, this is where you need to be at? You're at $10 million. In order for you to maintain competitiveness within the market, or you're going to get beat really quickly, you need to be spending this amount on creative in order to really start being in a good spot.
Yeah. Let me reverse out because it's a great question, but the way I've thought about it, because I think about you started this whole episode with like, hey, you guys have been in charge of some like amazing journeys and prolific brands, and there's been other brands like that we haven't been part of, like a True Classic Tea, for example, who again like figured out how to do this. And I look at it and I go, okay, none of those brands would have ever become anything more than a $30 to $50 million brand without figuring this out.
Right.
So then I go, okay, the question to me isn't like, well, what does it cost? It's more like, what would it cost you to not be able to figure out that second channel? So in my mind, I'm like, when Dr. Squatch made the decision to start investing in creative, it was like, I'm worried we'll never get off of Facebook. And in fact, I will say this, when they first ran our ad, they went from a $3 million run rate to a $10 million run rate on Meta. And then it started to plateau. And I'm like, what if they never put it on YouTube? They would have just been forever an $8 million brand, 12 million, maybe 15 million today. Right? Like, think about how critical even just getting that same ad on a different platform is. I think about the number of times we deliver an ad to a client and they stick it into their Meta account and they go, it didn't get spent. I'm like, yeah, but if you put it on any of the other channels that we literally built this for and did it right, it could transform the future of your business. Right. And so I go, okay, I think the question of like, what does it cost is important, because you do need to understand like, okay, yeah, like if I can't risk, taking $50,000 or $100,000 stabs at creative, then you can't. And we would tell somebody, if someone came to us and they're doing, $2-3 million a year in a run rate, and they're like, hey, yeah, like we want to do a, $100,000, $150,000, I'd be like, we're not going to take your money. That's a bad idea. Don't do it. But then I have other people who they're in the exact same moment that you're talking about, where they're just like hemming and hawing, and then they'll literally say out loud, they'll be like, that's just like 2 days worth of ad spend for me right now. So I guess if it works, that would be a really, really big. And if it doesn't work, I guess we'll learn something. And you start seeing them realize like, oh, like, so, at 10 million, it is a high, that's the thing. It's like, it is a higher risk to like get into a new channel, but then it becomes a liability to not get into a secondary channel as you get bigger. And so I think I'm like, yeah, I mean, at some point you do have to figure it out if you don't want to plateau or be at the mercy of a single platform, and how it's delivering your ads or anything else.
What about product market fit? How many brands have come to you and it wasn't necessarily an issue of media buying. So it's like for us, we can recognize that there's a plateau on a media buying. We're like, look, this is not a media buy issue. You know, this is your fourth, fifth agency. Like you've tried all the different strategies out there. Maybe, hear me out here. It's a creative issue that you're just running the same stuff over and over and over again. You have nothing that's exciting the market, right? And so it's like that can kind of, let's say, create some product market fit by having better stuff. But I wonder, because you guys see a lot of brands come through here, are there moments or what can you recognize within a brand where you say, this isn't a creative problem either? You actually don't have the right product for the market right now. Is there something that you can see where you're like, nope, hold on, pause. We're not going to take you on. I don't think that you have we can't work with this.
Yeah. That's a good question. I'm going to answer it with two. I feel like you keep doing this thing where you ask me a question and then I keep doing this thing where I'm like,
I love it.
Answer it in two different ways.
It's like the split testing on ChatGPT. Which answer do you prefer?
Oh man. Yeah. Oh my gosh. So yeah, there's a reality where once you get to a certain revenue number in general, it's clear you have product market fit with some form of product market. So, I mean, it's kind of I think how I put it, we do work with some, like every year we work with 3 or 4 startups who are funded, who want to like hit the market with a bazooka and try to like hit it right, go hard, right? And so, in those cases, right, you are at times looking at, okay, great, like what is currently being done in this category, and then what is our unique propositions within that category. So, you know, if it's a completely new product in a completely new category, that's obviously as hard as it's going to get because you're like, I have nothing to go off of. And we're just really transparent with those people. We're like, look, we're going to go through our process and we're going to make our best educated guess on like what the consumer's why is going to be. Obviously, you can survey people and talk to people as well. And there's creative testing that you can do. But I will just say, we don't get a lot of brands who don't have product market fit. And I'm actually gonna read something that my business partner Adam Wagner posted on LinkedIn the other day because I think it's more indicative of what we see. And so I'm gonna, if you don't mind, I'm just gonna read it. He says, he said the biggest D2C winners have one thing in common that most brands miss, and there's a reason our brands win over and over again. The biggest winners have unlocked broad top of funnel creative and spend a lot less time on niche UGC. It's true that algorithms are using creative for targeting, and you should have a robust marketing funnel filled with different hooks, landing pages, talents, etc. But that will not bring you massive household name success. Mm-hmm. It's a supporting character. Your brand's a supporting character in this story, not the lead. And that's what most brands get wrong. And he gives the example of when we worked with Dr. Squatch, we created this brand that resonated with men all across the country. In the city and everywhere else, you can be a big-time CEO or a small-time farmer and love Dr. Squatch. Think about how rare that is for a brand to be able to do. This allowed them to reach massive scale, keep their CPMs down, and have awesome conversion rates. And they surpassed many soap companies that are too niche towards blue-collar workers or cool urban businessmen, and those niches get stuck at $10 to $50 million. And so I think about like how true that is like we develop these audiences and these funnels, and we have these niches, and they get us to 10 million, 15 million, 20 million. And it's just like, we kind of get stuck and we're like, what the heck? How do we possibly reach a broader audience? And so that's just, I wanted to share that because I'm like, that's what we see is like, you have product market fit with this little audience. What about the broader audience? Yeah, that's really what we tend to see.
And I think that actually aligns very well with the previous episode I did a couple weeks back with Preston Rutherford, who was the founder over at Chubby's. And he talks about the 95-5 rule. And I really like the way that he illustrated that, where it's like a lot of the stuff that you're doing right now, the content, et cetera, that you're going after, it's going after the 5% that are in market right now. But the 95% of people that aren't like, hey, I want this right this second, you're not reaching them, both from content or even algorithmically, you're not reaching them. And so you need the content that will allow the algorithm to reach the people who aren't in market right now, because they're going to want to watch it and share it and enjoy it and say, this still resonates with me. I'm not ready for a new bar of soap or whatever right now, but like, I appreciate this. And so when I am ready for it, yeah, I'll think about this the next time I'm walking down the aisle, or the next time I need a bar of soap. I'm going to go ahead and Google that.
Exactly. Yep. Yeah, and that gets more and more important. The 95-5 principle gets even more important when you have a retail brand, like a retail forward brand, because you know, a lot of times people won't convert in the moment. But and I will say too, I think for people that are 100% at retail and not really online, it's freeing because they realize they are playing the 95-5 game.
Yeah.
They just recognize that that's the case.
Sure.
And D2C brands at times just don't. They're so used to getting that 5% that they just, I'm not interested in the 95.
You talked about making sure that the content revolves around your customer, right? And I think that's a big part of this then too, where it's like when it's evolving around your brand, it is only reaching 5%. When it revolves around them, it can reach 95%. Just throwing out some little fun stuff here. It reminded me of Copernicus, right? And heliocentrism. So I'll just throw it out there for fun because this is a nerd podcast as well.
I can't wait. Are we talking about cumulus clouds too?
No.
I'm just like using science words.
Yeah, right. Yeah, well, let's just throw out some other science terms, right? Deoxyribonucleic acid. So the other thing though that I was going to say about along those lines is like, what's a litmus test that you have for being able to say, I think that your brand's marketing is still too brand self-centered versus consumer-centered? Like, how can you tell? Because I think sometimes people try to make it consumer-oriented, but you, with your refined eye, can look at it and say, it's like, no, it's not. It's not even close to being, consumer focused yet. You're still very brand centric. How can you tell?
There's a couple. I mean, look, I could. There are very specific things that,
sure.
Like I'll give you a very specific. Like if your voiceover, your script says we or instead of you, right? Or your, right? Like, it's like just even the positioning, the nuance of like who you're speaking to, how you're speaking to them. When a brand is talking about themselves, what they stand for, what we stand for with you, there's like a lot of we. That's an obvious one. Another one is just ads that open with context instead of connection. So what I mean by that is like I'll see an ad that opens with, a beautiful shot of like a downtown skyline or something, instead of like speaking to, hey, you customer with your why, like you see yourself in this rather than like we show us. And so there's like very specific nuances that I see, but I think ultimately I want to back up and say clearly no one ever creates an ad with the intention of it not connecting with their end consumer.
Totally.
However, the reason they make the mistake is they go, well, this is what I want them. This is what I want to communicate to them, instead of like, what do they need to hear? Okay, then how do I reach them? It's just, it's a fundamental framing difference that most people like. That's what I'm saying, that they'll write a script with all the things they want to say before they even ask themselves, is this something that anyone would ever watch or listen to if it's on any platform? Like, they're just like, no, this is what I want to say. When you start from that vantage point, which honestly 95% of brands probably do,
right,
you're going to get that result that people are just like,
right,
cool, like you want to talk about you, what about me?
I like
what's
that.
my why? Yeah,
I want to talk about Raindrop a little bit then too. Why, like, where were you at in life that you were like, this is missing from my life, I need to start Raindrop. Raindrop is missing from the world, I'm going to do this. Like, why did you start Raindrop?
One of the things that most people don't realize is that Raindrop started incredibly humbly. And when I say that, I started Raindrop when about 15 years ago when I was 25 years old. And I literally just wanted to help people. I had nothing. It was like, I had no grand vision. I was, I realized that, like, I called it Raindrop because there's this great C.S. Lewis quote about friendship. And he talks about, if you're lucky, once in your life you come along a friend who's like two raindrops that come together in a windowsill. And that, like, it's just this beautiful, effortless thing. And so I was like, man, if I could help people with their business and with their creative and what they need, I could be that partner for them. But my big grand vision was like, if I had 3 employees one day and like wrote some local jingles for the car wash or something, like I'd be happy. And so
I love that.
My dreams have come true. I'm currently writing multiple jingles, but they are for a little bit bigger brands. And we've had 3 Super Bowl commercials, and a lot has happened. We have about 100 team members now, and so it has been a journey over the last 15 years. But it started really, really, really humbly. I mean, my first clients were I always say it was a massage therapist, not the massage therapy studio. It was a trainer, not the gym. It was, it was that small and that humble. I have no formal advertising training. I just really followed instincts that then over time I've been able to understand. I have a business partner I mentioned earlier, Adam, who's been able to operationalize and create, like, okay, we have this insight, we have this way of working. How do we do this so that it works time and again for people? What are we doing that's special? He's been able to extrapolate that, and we have an incredible team. I mean, last year we had 92-95% retention within our company. Like, we have some incredible team members that have been around for a long time, and have been a part of a lot of success. So very grateful for what we've been able to build. But yeah, that's the origin of Raindrop was 15 years ago. Very, helping with a WordPress website build, or shooting a commercial on my Canon T2i at the time.
Oh,
so,
nice.
Yeah.
I remember that one.
Yeah.
Okay, so the T2i specifically, you just brought back a memory
I
that
took
I
your
forgot
breath.
about.
I just took your breath away, Mr. Harris.
You did. So my wife's a photographer, and so she's done family photography, wedding photography. And there was the first time she did a wedding, she's like, I want a co-shooter for this. But at the time she couldn't charge. She wasn't charging enough to be able to afford a co-shooter, so I was her co-shooter. And so it's like we picked up a T2i as that was my co-shooting photography thing. So I remember being there. It's like, I'm not a visually creative person. I'm auditorily creative, like I'm musical and stuff like that. But the T2i that just brought back that memory of me going out, which ended up being like date nights with my wife. Of like, hey, we'd go out to do these weddings, and I'd be her co-shooter. So, which ended up being more of just her assistance. Like I'm holding up the reflectors and stuff.
Do you get PTSD going to weddings now, or are you able to go and enjoy? Okay,
I love it.
I shot weddings. I shot probably 60 weddings when I first started the business, trying to make ends meet and everything else. And it took me like 8 to 9 years before I could go to a wedding and relax and not be like seeing someone dressed in all black with a camera, being like, oh God, they could really use some help right now, or like, oh, I see them plugging into the soundboard. Oh, I really hope they get audio.
Oh man, right? Like I felt like there was a lot of times where we ended up being more of the wedding planner than the wedding planner, where it's like, oh yeah, I need the bride over here now. This is what's taking place. That's good. I might want to offline chat with you a little bit more about some of the wedding stories that we have, because I think that would be fun. But I don't want to derail the conversation too much down that path. I want to talk about Dr. Squatch. So, if I remember correctly, it's like they started around like 3 million, 6 years later, they're 2 billion. I could be making those numbers up, but it's somewhere around this vicinity. Like there was some significant growth they had. What do you think was the biggest risk that they took on their content, and how did that pay off for them?
Yeah. So, when we first started working together, I mean, the reality is that they were taking those, like, I mean, he was a $3 million brand, taking the biggest swing on his content he'd ever taken, and it really connected. I mean, at the time too, we were so early in our, and that was like 7, 8 years ago. We were pretty early in our, I mean, we were 7, 8 years into the business, but we were early into the more CPG, direct to consumer type of businesses, if that makes sense. We were really big. Like, we are a brand and creative agency at heart, but the like long form video and that kind of stuff, that was very new. And so when it came to where they were in the journey and the risks they were taking, it was a really, at the time, it was a very big risk for them.
Sure.
And I felt the pressure of that, like 100%. They really were like, we could really use something to like that. We need something to work here. We need to get something going that could really change the future here. And you always dream of that being possible, right? And you always plan for it. But then to have it happen and to see people respond and react, and not only buy the product but love the brand, was really exciting. And then to watch us work with them to, build that story and create additional product lines. I mean, we went and we created, ads for hair care and for deodorant and for a second one for soap. And then came like a mashup of like the best moments of all of them, which outperformed all. That was the one from 2020 you mentioned. It's like, that's a 5-minute ad of just like a best of. We did everything from UGC to Person on the Street to, all these different formats, not just long form, but all these other formats. And then we started getting into partnerships. So helping them launch Star Wars and Marvel and Warner Brothers and like all these different, world building things where they're tying their brand to these other great brands. And so that was the process of like just building a brand tone of voice and unlocking too that sense of like, it was founded by a guy named Jacques Spitzer, who like his why was, he was like, I have a skin condition that like needs natural soap. That's such a niche audience. And so, ultimately we were able to create something where it's like, we made a mundane task, which is showering, fun for men.
Right.
That's what we did. Like that was what that was. The commercials enhanced the product. And there's actually a lot of, most things are like that. I think about, why do I feel something when I'm holding a Coca-Cola versus like a Shasta?
Sure. Yeah.
Right. Like it's what brands do is they enhance the experience. They make you feel something, and the advertising lends itself to that.
I love that. Yeah, being able to.
But
it
was a huge risk for them, and that's the thing. It's like I think it's a good way to put. Earlier we were talking about the idea of like when to spend what, and I'm like, basically when you're small, the risk is you're taking a big swing for yourself, and then as you get bigger, as you go from 10 to 20 to 30, now the risk actually in my mind shifts, as I said earlier, to not figuring this out could cost you everything. Like it's like a big deal. Like you have to figure this out. So you're like delaying. It's like at first it's too risky for a lot of brands to like worry about secondary channels and stuff. And then it gets to the point where like not figuring this out is a huge blind spot, and one that, to your point, a competitor will figure out whatever. And now you're chasing, or you never do, or you try to, and then you fail, then you give up. Like, you get the point.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
You've done this. Obviously, you were mentioning even native Goose Creek candles. These are the ones we've talked about before. Bones Coffee, Shady Rays, Groons, Laundry Service. Like there's so many of these names that like just saying them, everybody can instantly picture the commercials that have run for these brands, because you guys have had such a good done a good job of like getting that type of creative content out there for people to enjoy. What do you think separates the ones that scale from the ones that stall? Like, so the ones that you just listed.
Yeah. And by the way, it's laundry sauce. I think there is a lot. No, it's okay. There's a laundry service out there.
Oh, yeah.
Laundry service.
I wrote laundry sauce.
And I was just like, and so my mind went, I was like, if a listener is listening and there's just like laundry service.
Thanks for the correction.
Well, look, all the brands you just named, they have multiple channels going for them. That's it. It's like, and then and Shady Rays was another great one where, they were at probably the exact numbers, somewhere between 15 and $20 million. And they were able to unlock YouTube and connected television. And, to this day, the other day I popped on and I'm like, man, they were able to scale those ads and scale their presence. And then when they did eventually roll out into retail, which I think they have like 3-4 locations that they own now, they were able to see success there. And they were able to, I think one of the things I love about being forced to create the content for these other channels, it also helps you to force yourself to understand your own story. A lot of brands, it's like they understand their USPs and messaging points, but they don't understand their own story because they never had to tell it to anybody. And so I love the work with Shady Rays. All the brands you just mentioned, their commercials that I love to watch, and I love that we created them. And I'm like, yeah, when you create advertising and marketing people love, like it helps with everything. And so that's when you mentioned that's what they have in common. they have all created brands that people love, and there will be knockoffs and there will be other brands, and it's like now they're competing with, they are the Coca-Cola and someone else is the Shasta.
Yeah, which is huge. That brand positioning within the mind is so hard to erase, which is a really benefit to be the one that captures that mind share earlier on. Yep. Is there ever an ad concept that you wish somebody would have went with and they didn't? And you're like, I wanted this to exist in the world and they said no, and I'm still a little bummed by that.
Yes. I'm sure there are lots of situations where we have pitched a client and, had a great idea. Maybe they went with another one. There's one that sticks out to me just because I literally thought to myself, this is a Super Bowl commercial. And I was like, oh my gosh, I love this idea. And then they didn't do it, which is fine. And I understood, like, there wasn't anything to do with the idea at the time. It was just like, okay, thanks for that. But then they just did a Super Bowl commercial. And I was like, no, I wish you did. So the concept was one that we pitched to Hexclad, and it was called Ramsatui. Ramsatui. So the overall idea was that there'd be someone who looks at the pan and says, like, so I can cook like Gordon Ramsay? And then basically there's a recreation of this idea of like like when that person thinks that, all of a sudden Gordon Ramsay's like, we had heated debates internally on whether or not he would be sitting on the guy's shoulders, like helping to like do it, or be like a miniature thing under a chef hat that like is pulling his hair. And then we really wanted to do like and then we could collab with Disney and come out with like a limited edition pans that like are all Ratatouille themed, but with Gordon Ramsay. And like, we just love this idea. I to this day, I recognize that it is insane, that it is improbable to pull off. And who knows, maybe not even on brand, but damned, I love the idea. And I still, to this day, think about Ramsatouille all the time.
Which camp were you in? On the shoulders or under the hat? Because I'm an on the shoulders guy. I think that's you're picturing me.
I was thinking that it would be really fun to have him on the shoulders, pulling his hair. And I was we were in meetings, and we hadn't even like pitched this idea. And I'm like, so would we put a harness on him and then like kind of like just make sure that he couldn't fall? Like, this is Gordon Ramsay we're talking about. And so that was one that just has a special place in my heart. And I love the team over there. They're incredible advertisers. But yeah, that one's always like, it was just like, I could just see it in the Super Bowl. I'm like, God, that'd be fun. And then they did a Super Bowl commercial this year and they killed it. But I was like,
yeah, they did a great job. But yeah, it was still Ramsatouille. It was still Ramsatouille. That's good.
It's not too late. It's not too late. I can see it. Number one ad of 2026.
That's good. Jacques, I want to get into the personal side of you, the human being, Jacques Spitzer, who you are. Tell me a little bit about your childhood and how that's shaped you into who you are today.
Well, we're going deep here, sir.
Yeah, what is about your mother? Lay down on the couch.
I think I'm like, wow, what would be interesting? I mean, the reality is I grew up in San Diego. I still live in San Diego. And so that has been a big part of just my journey, how I've met my wife and my business partner, so I have been rooted in San Diego for a long time. Since I was 3 years old. I was born in Northern California. And my parents growing up were both real estate agents. They worked with each other as partners. And they were very successful in doing that. I experienced some of the highs and lows as a child, watching them navigate. Early 90s were not good for real estate, and then mid to late were good, and then 2008 was really bad. Like watching the booms and busts and ebbs and flows of that business. But I learned from them like what it looks like to be in business for yourself, how to treat people, how to you know, my dad always said like activity breeds activity, and so just
I like that.
I learned either directly or innately a lot of things from them about how to treat people, how to build something, how to build relationships. I am very grateful. I'm very blessed to say that like I was somebody who learned a lot from my parents in terms of like who I wanted to become as a father, and like he was a role model. It wasn't like I'm like learning, okay, this is what I don't want to do. If that makes sense. I really had. I feel like that was I know that was a huge advantage in life, was to have this incredible incredible parents. I have a younger brother who ended up becoming a surgeon, so I have him on speed dial anytime I have a rash or something. I mean, they never put any pressure on me to do or become anything in particular. And none of us, and myself included, ever had any idea I would get into advertising.
Sure.
And so, they just sort of, they were always very supportive, and their schedules were flexible because they were business owners. So they made they made almost every sport game I ever played in, and just very
cool.
present. And that's something that, I have a 9-year-old son, and it's something that I've been able to do too. I lead his Cub Scout group, and I've coached his sports, and anything that he's done, I've been able to be involved and present. And it also impacts obviously running a business. I not just from the standpoint of thinking about how I work with a potential client, but also I think it's funny when people will say to me things like, well, it must be nice being your own boss. I'm like, okay, but I kind of have like 100 mini bosses, because like I love and support like every single person that works for us as well as our clients. So like ultimately, yes, like I have ultimate authority over my time and stuff, but like I also have a lot of people that I feel responsible for. I think my childhood was one that gave me the opportunity to prepare for that, I guess at another point in time, I'd love to understand too, like what was your life process, leading up to who you became professionally. But I could tell that story a million different ways. I think that's how it impacted me most professionally, which would probably be of most interest here.
I love, though, the way that you talked about how it's like having supportive parents is such I mean, if you want to talk about getting that opportunity, that makes such a difference, and that you're providing that then for your own kids, and, being there to be involved in their sports and things like that. I don't think that there's probably studies that say this, and I'm sure I've heard things. I don't know the facts, but it's like, I don't think you could really quantify just how impactful that is for being able to give people a catalyst for growth and taking on, bigger challenges.
Yeah, I totally agree.
We were talking about quirks and habits and things like that a little bit, and I'll let you tell yours here. One of mine that there's no good rational explanation for it. But if I have one hand gets wet for some reason, right? Like you're doing the dishes or whatever, one hand's wet, I have to wet the other hand before I dry them off. Like it bothers me to have one hand wet. So it's like they need to be equally wet. And
is
then
this
they can
the first time
dry.
that you've told people this?
I don't know. If I have said it, it was, more than a year ago. So it's been a while since anybody's listened to this. And so that's my thing, where it's like, this is just a weird quirk, and you would not know this about me unless I tell you, because you would never notice this.
Okay. So I hope this doesn't make it weird, but I totally knew that you were a double hand wetter. Like just from the moment I met you.
You can't look at somebody and know that.
Dude, I knew that. I was like, this guy's a double hand wetter. The moment I saw you, I was like, I had you squared up. So I apologize.
All right. Well, what's yours? What's yours? Your eccentricity here.
So before our conversation, you had asked me this question. I had to go home and ask my wife. And then we went, slept on it. The next morning, she's like, I got it. I'm like, what is it? She goes, you smell our cups before you drink out of them. And I'm like, oh, really? Okay, yeah, that's true. Because, and I realized what it was when I was in college, I started getting roommates and stuff. We didn't have a dishwasher. And so like, even if they did wash them, sometimes they wash them with like those like gross sponges that are probably like more filled with bacteria than like just what was in there originally. And so there'd be times where I'd get like a to-go cup or something and smell it, and it was like, oh, this is not clean. But like that habit has stuck with me, and so sometimes she'll ask like, oh, can you get me some water? And I'll like grab a cup and I'll smell it, and then I'll fill it, and she's just like, God, that's so weird. I'm like, yes, it is so weird. It's like a primal instinct to protect myself. So yes,
roommates are the best at encouraging that type of behavior, especially guys. Reminds me, and I'm going to call him out by name, one of my buddies, Matt Bennett. I'm not even going to hide his name. I remember being over at his house when we were in maybe high school, and we were like, Bennett, your room smells awful. Like, I don't like, what is going on? We find the culprit. It's like a glass of milk that had solidified in his room on his dresser. Smelled terrible, right? It's like powdered form now. He goes, oh, I know how to take care of this. He doesn't take it down to the kitchen. He takes it to his brother's room, puts it in his brother's sock drawer for him to find later. And you're like, oh man, I can't even imagine what that smelled like later. So Larry Bennett, if you were wondering what was going on, that was Matt Bennett probably 20 years ago. I'm ratting him out right now.
Oh, Matt. I mean, think about the impact he had on you, William. You're still thinking about this.
It was hilarious. It was so foul. I want to ask you a little bit about your faith and how you apply that in your work. You mentioned a C.S. Lewis quote, and so I'm like, ooh, I kind of latched onto that because I love C.S. Lewis quotes. How do you use faith within what you're doing at Raindrop?
So, I mean, here's what I'll say. I apologize in advance. I'm just a big Lion Witch in the Wardrobe fan. I'm actually not a Christian. No, I'm just kidding.
Walk back that question real quick.
No. I'm just messing with you. I don't know, man. See, we're getting towards the end, and I'm just getting crazy.
I love it.
I'm like calling you a double hand wetter and messing with you. Okay. So here's what I'll say. I think people look. The reality is like, how does it impact Raindrop? It impacts it in every way, because I think ultimately, every day when it comes to like work and what we do, it's like, all right, well then, like, why are we doing this? Like, to some extent, we have to work to make money and everything else. But there are so many decisions to make along the way that impact the life that you're living and providing, and so your values obviously play a big role in that. So for like my business partner and I, the question has never been like, how much can we make from Raindrop, right? Like, it's never been like, how much can we take from it? Right. It's been like, okay, how can we create an environment where people can love what they do and can do their best work? And yes, the result of that, like, we have to run this in a way that's profitable versus unprofitable. But our goal is to create this, a people first environment, where people are, it's like, you're never going to love every project you work on or anything else, but like, on the whole, like, is this fulfilling work that shows progress in our ability to grow, both, emotionally, financially, in all the different ways. And so it impacts, everything that we do from that standpoint. It really is, it impacts life, right? Like, why are we here? Why do we do this? Like, it really impacts the way that we think about the work and how we do it and how we try. It's like, obviously we're not perfect and we make mistakes, and there are times I get mad or whatever, and I wish I hadn't, or whatever, times where, I just think about starting this 15 years ago by myself, and then like all the things you have to learn about leadership, and knowing that like I'm nowhere near done learning. I'm going to make so many more mistakes and look back and be like, oh my gosh, 40-year-old self, what were you thinking, right? And so it is something that I tend to at times have a hard time talking about, knowing too that like I'm going to mess up and disappoint people, and I'm like, just because I have the best intentions doesn't mean I'm going to be perfect.
Man, that's so true.
And I think sometimes when people think about faith and business, they're like, man, you're a hypocrite if you can't do it how your faith would align with. And I'm like, I'm doing my best here. So
Yeah.
I think that's the best way to put it. It impacts everything in broad and specific ways. But yeah.
I think that's the exact opposite of being a hypocrite, though, right? Because it's like, to a point, that is one of the beautiful things I think about the Christian faith specifically, is it says you're going to mess up. You won't be able to do it. And you need someone else to kind of redeem you on your behalf. And so I think admitting that is a big thing. I love the way that you talk about this, though, and the way that you've approached running your company. I've tried to do the same with mine as well. And I remember from employee one, I remember saying that it's like, we will have amazing health insurance from the very first employee, because I want to make sure that, whoever works on my team, they're taken care of, like, physically, mentally, emotionally. It's like, and I'm not going to be perfect. I made plenty of mistakes. And for those moments, I looked at Hebrews 11 for me, right? It's like the hall of faith, but it's like the hall of faith talks about like all of these people, and you go like every single one of them in their lives. And like the Bible literally records the big screw ups that they had for generations to read about. And it's like, man, that's pretty brutal. At least my mistakes for the most part are fairly self-contained or whatever in like these smaller areas and pockets. But I appreciate that you lead with that integrity. And I think that that's a big part of your success, I think, is having that mentality from the get-go.
I appreciate it. I mean, I would say I don't know if it has led to more or less success, but I am happy with, I mean, in all seriousness, I'm like, maybe I could have been more, maybe I could be more successful if I operated different. I don't know, but I am happy with what we're building, and that matters more to me than anything else. And I say that because I'm like, I recognize there's a lot of ways to win. There's a lot of ways to win out there.
If we'll end it with this one. If your son ends up watching this podcast episode sometime, right, and he's older and he actually cares to watch an 1.5 hour long podcast episode, what advice would you give him? So, in generally speaking, then this is for the rest of people who are listening then as well. It's like, this is the advice that you would give somebody who has aspirations of going and creating a business that is going to, do amazing things someday. What is that piece of advice that you would give? And this doesn't even, let me say, I'm going to take that back. Not even just for business. This could be life advice. It could be business advice, but like, this is a piece of advice that you'd love to pass down.
I think it's a full-time job to be a good dad. He's got so much more stuff than I had. He's got 101 Dalmatians on a CD-ROM. I'm quoting the Will Smith, Just the Two of Us, by the way.
I was like, wait a minute, CD-ROM, like, where's this coming from?
Dude, I am losing my mind at the end of this podcast. I'm sorry, everything's a joke right now. Lordy, I was wondering how long I could go with that lyric from that song, Just the Two of Us. Okay, let me real answer.
Okay.
Real answer. I think. More broadly, I feel like, look, you can't control what other people do. You can't control what the world would do. You can only control yourself and your character. And it has been something that, like, I have to tell myself over and over and over again, because there's so many factors that continue to change. And especially with him being 9, and I'm watching him just start to become aware of peers, and you can watch these children go from completely unaware of anything to starting to feel that sense of insecurity and comparison. And
for sure,
maybe I'm speaking also to like what I wish he could just hold on to right now. Is like, dude, you have a beautiful heart, because you have good intentions and you mean well, and there will be people that might take advantage of that, people that will hurt you, people that will break your trust, and it's like, you can't necessarily control that. You can only control who you are and what you're about, and your relationship with, God. Like, you can't look to other people for those answers. Like, that's yours. I think that's what I would say. And it's also why I think that Will Smith quote came to my mind, because it's a great song, but he also the whole intention of that song is he's like talking to his son as a baby, saying, someone's going to hurt you, and hurting them back isn't going to make you feel better. Then ironically later he slaps someone on national television, but beside the point,
because we all make mistakes.
Advice holds. Okay.
Yes.
Oh my gosh. Yes, that would
good.
be my thought.
That's beautiful. Well, this has been a lot of fun learning from you and learning about you. If people wanted to get to know you, follow you, work with you, what's the best way for them to do that?
Well, I'm very on the internet. So what I mean by that is, I post a lot of content to my my Instagram and TikTok channels. Is just my name, Jacques Spitzer. I'm pretty active on LinkedIn as well, and then heck, I even got my own website. I'm everywhere. So they can basically Google my name and you will find me on the internet. That's by design.
Right,
on purpose. Yes.
I love it. Yeah. Well, Jacques, it's been very fun talking to you. I appreciate your time, your knowledge, your wisdom here today.
Thanks, William.
Yeah, thank you everyone for listening. I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thanks for listening to the Up Arrow podcast with William Harris. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.